please engage, comment, ask questions, raise your hand, interrupt, argue if you must. So I know Paul likes to argue as well. So I've learned that in the last few weeks working with him a little bit. So it's fantastic. So no wonder Howard likes him so much. So cool, man. Thanks, guys. Over to you guys, Howard and Paul. Thanks.
Well, Bolton, thank you very much. And over to parental guidance.
All right. Okay, yeah, just welcome from my side. Happy to go through this content with you. It is a pretty packed session, and obviously some of the content today would be geared more towards the professionals. So in my mind, that's either an MDM architect maybe, or somebody in a technical team, or in the architecture team, or even on the power user side of the data, maybe a strong data steward. So today we're going to talk a lot about the sort of hows, and also what's. But I just want to start with this familiar story, because it's a nice way to just set the scene for those of you who have seen this before. Apologies. But this is such a nice, simple story to make MDM real. And if you hear noise on my side, it's the aeroplanes flying. It was so quiet in lockdown, and you forget sort of how noisy these aeroplanes are until they're back en route. Anyway, so in a typical MDM scenario, the idea is, first and foremost, if there's one thing that an MDM system needs to do well, it's identity management, right? So it needs to figure out if person A is the same as person B, or product A is the same as product B, and so forth. There's a lot around that, but that's really a central concept. And so in the story, we have this fictional character, Thandi Sithole, and here we've got two records of this person, one from the CRM and one from the website. And it looks like the same person. The names are similar. The address kind of almost looks the same. There's enough differences to fool an engine, unless it's a bit more intelligent engine. But if you're a human and you look at this, you can almost immediately say, look, there's actually the same person. So in the process of getting to a point of identity resolution, you typically want to just standardize and make sure you've got you kind of get your data on the same level. You cleanse it, and at that point in time, you can actually figure out whether this is the same person or not. If it is the same person, you want to merge that data together, and then you have a merged record. And at this point in time, we talk about survivorship here, and this is the same story, but we're going into a little bit more detail than last time, right? Survivorship will come in later in the questions as well. Howard and I picked up a question by Reno. We'll cover that. But survivorship is also important here because you've got two sources of data with the same. Some of these sources have the same data elements, but you have to figure out which system do you want to trust with, for example, the address, and do you want to maybe trust the other system for the email address and so on. It's called survivorship. And it sort of happens at this point in time. When you merge a record, you pull the best information together from different places, and you then have a merged record. When you have the merged record, you can then go into an enrichment stage where you can now link it to other systems in your ecosystem as well, other data sets or data sources, and you can get a single source of truth. Once you have that, you can discover additional things about this record, in this case a person, so who's related to her, husband, sibling, location information, some once or twice removed relationships, like Tebogo Sithole here is maybe not the same, maybe not directly related, but there is a link there through Bongani Sithole and so on. And this is all necessary for a whole bunch of applications, right? So from just a better customer experience, to this day, I still get, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you, the typical, I mean, the example is cliche because it's just so prominent, but I still get different information on my home loan account statement than I do on my check account, even though it's the same bank. It's still a big problem. And then, MDM in context, MDM by itself, and this is an important point to note, just from when we talk as professionals, as people who implement this stuff and people who get sometimes excited about this stuff, it's not really excited for everybody, because the exciting things come as a result of doing good MDM. Doing good MDM, it's like engineers get excited about engineering stuff. They get excited about exactly how the engines work and so on. But ultimately, not everybody is that interested in how everything works. They just want to see the shiny car or the performance, feel the performance, or watch it on the screen. And in a similar way, MDM is a lot about plumbing. It's a lot about under the hood kind of stuff, because it enables something else. It enables good analytics, better decision-making, reporting, better processes, etc. So it is a lot about managing. We say this often, managing a master data is quite different from the usage of master data. All right. And to go through the MDM process is what you do at the end of it. That's why there's a question mark there. Could be a number of things, but it's normally for something else. Right? You don't do the MDM just for the sake of MDM. And when we get excited about it, we have to remember it's not, not everybody does get excited about it. Which brings me kind of to the next thing. We mentioned this in passing, but just to remind you guys, compliance, operations, and analytics, these are the three main reasons why you would actually be interested in doing MDM in the first place. It will fall into one of these. You either have to do it for compliance, or it will greatly help compliance. If you haven't been to yesterday's talk by Howard and Caroline Mouton, it's a great thing a session to just get hold of, because they talked about master data within the context of privacy and POPIA and so on. But anyway, so it's either compliance, or you're going to increase your operational efficiency, or you're going to do better analytics. And those are the three things. And to kind of make this real, this is an Informatica slide, and again, I'm not pushing the product. It's just I've been in touch with it and I know it. Other products have maybe similar things. I just know that this particular system of Informatica is really good at taking, on your left-hand side, taking the typical old school master data concepts like your core data and so on, but also bring in transactions and interactions into the game. This is new. This is outside, kind of just outside of the periphery of MDM. This is not MDM. MDM is about the slowly changing shared data in an organization. It's places, people, and things. But when you apply modern technology and you bring in the old sort of, I don't want to say old school, because it's not less relevant today. But once you bring in the kind of classic, let's call it that, MDM processes in play, and you add to that interactions, transactions, which you wouldn't have done before in your data management ecosystems, MDM ecosystems, then you get to a point where on the right-hand side here, there's a lot of things you can then discover: relationship graphs, attitudes, sentiment, actions, things like that. But at the center of that is still good master data management. Okay, a quick story. I tell this story often because it's such a good use case, and I'm going to zoom in on just one or two areas today. It's such a good use case. What I've been involved in this project in its infant stages, and Altron is still busy doing work there, making up the MDM team. And why it's a good story is it has been about 8 years or so since we've started, and we've tackled big use cases along the way, all solved using MDM. And in this case, it's all solved using the same technology platform and very similar processes. But you can see there, if you look at the big sort of things on the road there, from number 1 to 5, is it's very different business problems that we're trying to solve. And again, if ever you implement MDM, try to call it something else. If you can, it is a good indication that you've actually linked it to a business problem, right? So we, like for example, our first use case was international procurement. Under the hood there is product MDM, just that. It had to do with implementing a standard classification standard, in this case E-class. It's getting all the records in, classifying them the same, so you can compare apples with apples, then do analysis, and then go into things like price negotiations and stuff like that. And then we did financial MDM, completely different use case, right? But same underlying MDM concepts. Then we went to doctors list. It's a word that they use, doctors list, and that's really a party-based MDM solution that sits on underneath there. And then enterprise reference data, and then identity and access management. And I want to zoom in specifically on the party model today. Just before I move on, you'll see then on the right-hand corner here, if you have a good MDM suite, you can use that suite to do other things that are not necessarily hardcore MDM, which is what we've done here. In this case, the team has been using TIBCO EBX, and they've implemented little apps like that. That is not, it's not big MDM things, but it's apps that's being used in the organization very effectively. Same technology and same concepts underneath. And that's just good to take note of. All right, so just to remind you, I know I've told the story before, but Mediclinic's problem was that, remember, it's an international hospital group. It's a great South African story because it started right here in the 80s, I think. And they branched out and now have operations in the Middle East, in Switzerland. It's called Hirslanden there. The branding is called Hirslanden, and in the UK. All right, and doctors work in different ways depending on what country you're in. If you're a doctor in South Africa, you're not allowed to work for a hospital group. You have to have your own practice, and you just use the hospital facilities to do. If you're a specialist, for example, in cardiology, you'll use and look for hospitals with good cardiac facilities. If you're a doctor in the UK or in Dubai, you actually work. You're an employee of the hospital group, so it works different there. That means from an HR perspective, things are different. From a legal and ethical perspective, things are different. So that's quite important to note. And in South Africa's case, Mediclinic wanted to make sure that the good doctors out there know about the facilities that they provide, right? So if you have, pardon my dogs, if you have good, if you're an oncologist or cardiologist, like I've mentioned, you really want to make sure the doctors know about you, that you have facilities there, that you've got good staff, and that you can deal well with the patients. And so they had no idea about how this worked, and the registration data was out of date. In other words, they didn't have enough information about the doctors. They didn't know what the qualifications are, specialities, accreditations, all of those things they didn't know. So marketing was an issue. So again, we pulled back the MDM problem into a marketing-related problem that we wanted to solve. And we did that using the party model. Now, I'll jump a little bit into the party modeling in a minute. But just to say at this point in time that the party model is such an important aspect in MDM solution design that it's a whole topic on its own, and we'll be getting into that. So before we get there, just again, as by way of reminder, we're talking about master data management. So what is it? What is master data? Well, it's either one of these three things typically. It's either people, places or things. And it's the subjects, it's the nouns of any sentence. And it's the subjects of any insights and analysis that you want to do. The management of that data really boils down to three things. You have to get it, you have to curate it, and you have to share it. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. And this curation, all these processes to get it into one place, apply survivorship, figure out how matching and merging will work, sending it to human data stewards if need be to make sure that you don't have duplicates, etc., etc. All of those things can be encapsulated into these three steps. Okay. A little bit more about the ecosystem. We've talked about this as well. Just if we just want to geek out and talk tech, or not technology, but just the mechanisms of MDM is really cool because it's the one thing that pulls together a lot of other data management practices and knowledge areas. Data governance is sometimes companies as a step towards implementing data governance actually do MDM. Data quality is automatically sort of being looked at and dealt with when you are embarking on an MDM project. Data integration is a big part of that. Reference data is often dealt with in the same project. And of course, data architecture and modeling is at the center of a lot of the stuff. So it brings back, you can't just come out of college, university and become an MDM specialist. You have to have traveled a few roads to be able to get to all the different aspects and and just get into the MDM game. If you are being pulled into MDM, which we are trying to do with some of our, when I was at Altron, some of our interns, then that's also a good way to kind of, they get thrown into the deep end a bit because they have to learn a lot of things altogether. But it's such a nice topic to bring data management in general into the same space. Howard, you'll just let me know if there's any questions or whatnot, right?
I'll certainly do that.
Right.
There's more questions about the doggy in the window.
The dogs, yeah.
Not a problem.
I've got two Dashuns and a rescue husky puppy, so they can make a lot of noise. Anyway, okay, so there's different ways. I'm gonna talk about three data sharing architectures today. The truth is there are more than these, but it's kind of just more of on a spectrum. So on the one hand of the spectrum, you get a registry model, a registry sharing architecture. It really means that your MDM system is basically an index into all the other systems, all the other systems of records for the master data. So it's an index, really. You want to go to the index, but the index will send you to the actual SOR to get the information, the data there. It's fairly easy to implement in theory, but you can get fairly complex situations where you need to go and pull all the data from the various places. To be honest, I haven't seen real MDM implementations with this style. However, a few years ago, I was working in the days of SOA. That was before the microarchitecture kind of philosophy took over. But in services-oriented architecture, they had this philosophy about the service will be in the middle, and you call the service, and the service will go out and pull things together. That's almost the idea behind the registry, in a way, in a more lighter way. But so on the other hand of the spectrum, so you've got registry on the one side, on the other side you've got a hub, transactional hub architecture. And in this one, your governance is really good because everything is in one place and you don't allow any new data, for example, to be created elsewhere in a system of record. Your hub is the originator of data and it shares it from there on. So all the applications go through the hub. The hub is the system of record for all your master data. Okay, so that's the two ends of the spectrum, really. And in between is really where you get into in the real world where people lie. fall into. And this is, let's just call it consolidated. There's you can either lean a little bit to the registry side, or you can lean towards the hub side, but at the end of the day, you're going to end up with something consolidated typically. And this is a hybrid approach. In this style, the system of record still deals with its own master data, but it's being pulled and consolidated into MDM, into the MDM system, and it's made available through there. This picture here comes from the DMBOK. It is a fairly full application of this idea. We've got the master data management system sort of in the middle here, and you can even go into smaller areas like local data sharing hubs, different smaller areas that actually serves different applications, or you can just have one. Again, don't get too fussed about it. The idea is that in the middle somewhere, you're going to have a system that manages your master data, and its responsibility is to share it to whoever needs it. Okay. If sort of thinking back to our MediClinic story, and also one of the other stories that I tell about the retailer customer that we have is sometimes, again, if your data management suite software package is good, you can start off with an MDM architecture and an application, a solution, and you can actually branch that out to become more of a hub. In this case, if you want to compare it to these things, more of a hub, because it also becomes a system of record for an aspect of the data. The example that I have is the store management app that we wrote, or are writing for our retail customer. I'm not sure if my teammates are on this call. They can chip in later and share more about that. All right, so these are just very shortly, I mean, it's a big topic, but we don't want to get too much into it. So just in summary, that's what you have. Registry hub, consolidated in the middle, and those are the basic ideas behind data sharing architectures.
So Paul, maybe I can just interrupt there. So there are a few comments. The one is about differentiating MDM with reference data, but let's leave that one for a little bit. There were comments made by Neil Gage in terms of saying the maturity levels of the other capabilities will have a direct impact on your MDM journey. And so certainly for me, it's almost one of the areas that I suggest you have to be careful of taking on an MDM journey when you've got lots of immaturity in all the areas. So there's any comments from you on that side?
Yeah, I want to support that. I think a lot of MDM initiatives fail because it does require investment, and it does mean that you have to take a bit of a longer view. MDM is not a silver bullet. It is I don't know. It's a color, whatever. It's any color but silver.
Yeah.
Because you have to go through a lot of thinking now. If you don't have maturity in your organization that allows for the thinking to happen, you're going to spend a lot of money and waste it. And again, which is why, I mean, that's a bleak view to have. But one way to overcome that is to call it something else. Because it's not as simple as that. If you can manage to call it something else, it means a few things have happened. It means that you've had a good journey with a business. You've got a clear use case, you've got a business name for it, and there's a specific business problem to solve. And you just happen to implement MDM along the way. Obviously, from an architecture perspective, it's not like that. You actually implement something solid, but it's the way that you kind of manage the process, and that actually brings us into the next part of the deck, and that's what kind of an approach could your project take? Now, we have had these slides up before, and the context there was your data stewardship model, right? But these are also important if you think about if you're a professional, again, you're a team lead or you're an architect or a PM or program manager that needs to drive these things through. You have to pick a style for your project that'll work with your organization and that will not upset the culture too much. So one is to build your project around establishing MDM for a certain domain, like for customer or for employee or product or financials. I would say, happy to get disagreement here, but I think this one probably requires the most maturity in your organization, because by the time you try to do these things, if your business is not clear about how they think about their customers, how it's divided up, what the different angles are, you know, the classic thing is, you know, marketing's definition of a customer is not the same as finance and so forth. If those arguments have not been has not happened yet, it will happen when you do this, and that's just to be noted. Okay, so the first one is your domain based. The second one is functional area department. So you can implement MDM by looking at it through your departmental lens, sales department, finance department, and so on. And that means that you are tackling the master data concepts that are relevant to that department first. Okay, so for example, sales. Sales is going to be, there's certainly going to be products involved there, but so will there be in marketing, right? So if you implement MDM in such a way as to help sales, by the time you hit marketing, you would have you've got a few things built, and so on. It's just the way you chop it up, right? The third one is a process-driven approach. So if you've got arrays or case-wise installed on your premises, and you've got a lot of business analysts doing work in there, that means your business is probably process-orientated, and maybe this is a good approach. So you take it by process. You figure out what your processes are, and again, you don't boil the ocean. All of these mechanisms are just there for you to find a way to control the scope of what you're busy doing. And the process-driven approach is a pretty nice one. Again, in a process, you actually might span many different domains and many different departments, but you kind of zero in on those aspects of the master data that will help that process go along. So you basically think big, but you implement small. Third one is a system-based approach. This one is actually fairly common. I would say most of the kind of customers that I've been dealing with personally, I've mentioned this before, even if you don't have an MDM system, everybody's doing master data management. You have to, right? From when computer systems was there, you manage it. You didn't need elaborate systems back in the day of mainframes. We had an interesting discussion about that the other day, actually with you, Howard, about back then it wasn't such a big problem because everything was in one system. But anyway, especially in organizations that's been operating for a while, I'm thinking about insurance companies, especially finance institutions, things like that. You would almost have a natural kind of tendency to think about your data, not in terms of data, but in terms of systems. So it's one style to do it. You tackle it by system, but the idea is you don't stay here. You move to one of the others. Hopefully domain, I would say, over time. And then there's a project-based approach. Sometimes it's just no other way. You want to get MDM, off the ground, and you just take it project by project. And just as a reminder that MDM projects are there to introduce MDM into the organization and to get things established. Stand up your technology stack, get your teams going, build your practice, build your communities as well. But then it's a business as usual thing to take forward, so it becomes part of your business. And those are the 5 basic approaches to run your project. Do we need to stop for any comments?
Well, there were a couple of comments, but let's try to get through, and then I can read them off at the end.
All right. Cool. Let's jump into party modeling. Okay, so whenever I talk about that, I want to just give Lynn Silverstone a shout out. he's just an interesting guy to hear speak, and I ran into him a few times in the EDW conference. I had a beer with him. It was really cool. But he's helped me a lot in how I think about party modeling and modeling in general. He's just a very good guy to follow. And these books are old. It came out in 2001, and they are still very useful and relevant. And I still refer to them often. The basic concepts haven't changed too much. So let me just talk a little bit more about what we mean. So if the word party or party modeling or party models is new to you, it plays a very important part in MDM architecture, wherever we talk about customers or employees or things like that. If you have a customer 360 or an employee 360, student 360, anything like that, you are dealing with actually under the hood, you're dealing with parties with a specific type of classifier. So first of all, parties can either be individuals or organizations. I would actually say franchise, Howard, is probably an organization too.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, which I've learned through experience, is that you can sometimes have these scenarios where the different contact details are separated across the franchisee and the franchisor. So I've picked up some challenges trying to fit both into the same into the organizational area. Okay.
Yes, and sometimes you can get one kind of party that actually has both. So, for example, a supplier could be an individual or a company.
Yeah.
But by and large, a party can be an individual organization, a franchise, or a bot. You need to sometimes keep track of the bots as individuals.
And their relationships with customers and advice.
Yes. The bots could have KPIs and and things like that, and performance metrics and so on. Okay. And it always parties deal with other parties always through the concept of a relationship of some kind. So, for example, an individual could have an employment agreement with an organization, right? So, I, as an individual, work as an employment some company, or I am a customer of a patient, maybe of Mediclinic or whatever. So it's always the idea is that you have parties and they are connected to other parties via something transient and temporary. I'm an employee or a customer and so on, typically for a period of time. Could be a long period, but it still has it's going to have an end date at some point. And the roles that you have here are often connected to the relationships. So let's go into a little bit more of a practical view.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's Michelle Kelly here. I understand the concept of the party modeling, since about 2010, we've done that at our organization, the one I was at. Tell me something, that party relationship, if you would you have a many-to-many between that party and the party role? Is that party relationship entity kind of like a resolving entity between that many-to-many?
Yeah, it depends on how you implement it. It could be. I'm gonna use different words. So what we've, for example, used at one of our customers is we said, let's talk about the word affiliation. All right. So we've got people that buy from this company, and they are affiliated to the company in some way. So some are affiliated because they are account customers, and some are affiliated because they are loyalty customers. And that's how we differentiate it between two different affiliations, but the role was still the role of customer. So in that case, it's interesting because it's a single role that you play, but the context in which it happens is also important. So depending on how your design there works, you know, and in fact, depending on how you think about your business and how you want to model your relationships between the parties and you as an organization, that could adapt. Howard, I don't know if you want to pick that up as well.
No, I think you answered it correctly, unless Michelle has got any further questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Makes sense.
Yeah, so basically the relationship between two parties, there could be different roles handled on those different in that relationship, and so you have to model those different areas differently.
Yeah. So here's an example of what we've done. I think I've presented on this elsewhere. I'm a big fan of Archimate to help me with my conceptual thinking before I get into the actual data modeling. So, and that's why I'm also giving a shout out to Len Silverstone, because this kind of this order of how you read this model is basically from how he does it. But so in this context, this was for a medical aid organization, or a medical aid administration was for MedScheme. In here, we've got a party, either a person or organization, and the party always acts in the context of a role. Now here, I filtered out all the other roles that they have many, but I've focused on healthcare provider role. And this is the way that we've, this is a mechanism we've used to just make clear what roles are we talking about when we say healthcare provider. Okay, so if they think about healthcare providers, they think about these things. They think about what they call facility, which is an organization, and this could be a hospital or a rehab or a mental health facility. They talk about a healthcare practice, and there could be an individual practice, or a group practice, or partnerships, and there could be others as well, like a supplier, healthcare professional, and so on. And these roles, these parties that plays a specific role has relationships with other parties through their roles. And again, we could say here that a person is maybe a family practitioner, so the practitioner relationship would be there above. And you would have another person here who could be something like a patient. And when you model relationships between parties like this, you don't paint yourself into a corner easily, because a person can play more than one role at different points in time. And this is the whole idea of a party concept. It's to allow a human person or an organization to play more than one role in many contexts without painting yourself into a corner again. And that's why we had a question about CRM the other day in the previous presentation, and that's what I kind of have against CRM systems. Not to pick on them, but they often are thinking about people too simplistically.
And then just another question, and then I think also what is important is the usage of a business glossary to help with the accuracy of the modeling. So if you understand the actual business definition and description in conjunction with your modeling, you would know exactly where you would link what entities to based on your definition. So it's good to have a business glossary in place. I mean, and that's also a journey. It's not a once-off. It's a journey.
Yes. Yeah.
And Michelle, what I like to do as well is, we had the fact that data governance, master data is dependent on data governance, where the glossary is, and we have this relationship between, if your glossary is well defined, you should almost be able to create a conceptual model from your glossary and vice versa. So if you've got a simplified data model or conceptual model, and in some cases we can get to logical and it goes, but from a conceptual model, you should be able to work out your glossary and have the right definitions.
If you've got a good tool, you'll see, Michelle, This word is underlined. This was done in Visual Paradigm, and you can actually highlight any word, right-click, add it to your glossary, and you can actually build up your glossary that way. Obviously, it's nice for capturing. It's not so nice for displaying, but it's a way to kind of just in your models collect that information, and they could then be published to a wiki or some other system or whatever, or the data governance platform. All right, but so again, this kind of modeling was done to understand this is nothing to do with the technical implementation yet. This is just about clarifying how people think about their business. In this case, how MedScheme thought about their roles. And once you have that down, your design will then be a lot easier to do. I thought I'd just quickly bring this picture in because we're running out of time. We thought we would, but this is important because this shows how important party modeling is when you then start to map out business scenarios, right? So here we've only said, look, what are the kind of roles that we're actually dealing with here? In this picture, we're saying, all right, now we've got a business scenario. We have, where's the patient? We have a patient, and the patient received treatment from a healthcare provider. And the healthcare provider is in a relationship here with a supplier, you see? And so this is where your stories come alive, because I can track each and every one of these roles back to our role master here. In fact, this is the big whole role master that's got everything in it. There's more here. I don't want to, don't look at the detail. I'm just saying that once you have a clear idea of how your roles work, you can narrate and work out your business scenarios, which will be supported by data later on a lot clearer. If you don't have something like this, you're gonna hit the questions at a later point in time, and you will have to go and reanalyze or re-interview people and whatnot. And by that time, the technical team is under pressure. They need to deliver. They're late, and it's not a pleasant experience. We've all been in there. If you haven't yet, you will at some point. Okay. All right. Unless you kind of do as much of this as possible before. All right. So just a few short words on the technology stacks. Again, having a professional in mind. When you have a good MDM tool, it will have to allow you to do things like this, what you see in front of you. Modeling is an obvious one. Needs to be able to make merging easier.
Yeah, sorry, just another question that I'm actually thinking about. Obviously, one would also need to have an information reference model. I don't know if you've covered this. Sorry, I was in a meeting. I was so disappointed I couldn't join from the start. But obviously, you would need to have an information reference model, kind of, that segregates your customer and market, supplier, partner, products and services, at a higher level, so that you would actually know, because how would you know exactly what entities to actually bring in if you don't have that reference model up front, your information reference model that speaks back to your conceptual model, because your conceptual model lays the foundation for the logical model further down the line. Would you need that information reference model up front?
Yes, that's a very good question. You do have reference models like IBM's famous or infamous IA. They've got one. There's others as well. If you're in insurance, you'll probably look at Accord as well, and so on. What I like is, although I've used those before and they are very useful to look at, but you still have to do a lot of thinking to figure out what is applicable to what your customer, what your organization is looking for. Why I like to give Len Silverstone a shout out is, in these books, the first book is about the generic ideas of party, product, service, etc. In the second book, he starts to apply that to certain industries. And in the meantime, he's developed a lot of the stuff that he didn't publish, but he sort of makes it available if you deal with him. Howard, maybe at some point you can talk about this Reserve Bank experience.
Yeah.
But But Michelle, so he then has basically, he publishes these reference models for you per industry. And that's what I used in this engagement, actually. So I didn't know anything about the medical aid world to any deep degree. But by going through those models that he created, even if it's just the sort of basic versions, I could start off with the names that you see here. And then with the business actually workshop, okay, actually they don't call it they don't call it a hospital or facility, they call it something else or whatnot. So you kind of start at a place, but you don't, if you have about a 60%, I would say 65% reuse of a reference model is good, you still have to do that last part and make sure it applies to the business directly and you don't overload it. We have done it a couple
Sorry, Paul. Could I see if we can get through and then we can bring this discussion afterwards?
All right, yeah. Thanks, Howard. Yes, so we can certainly chat after that as well because it's so important. Okay, let me not pause too much on this anymore. I think just let your eyes roll over these things. It is important for a good suite to have it. In any MDM solution, you'll need things like this. Okay. Again, I'm sort of mentioning TIBCO and Informatica here because it's what I'm most familiar with. But what I do want to say about MDM systems is it's not just one thing. Let's look at this one first because we're professional in the professional talk today. A good suite is also a platform for solution development that relates to good data management. And that's why at MediClinic, we could actually build all those different solutions using one technology set, one set of skills too, but many different applications. And so it's not an app that you just buy off the shelf only. It is an app in this sense because it's what your data stewards and your users are going to look at. But there's a whole system of processes, modeling, architecture, versioning, all kinds of things under the hood of it. It's not just a database that's a central place for your data. Many people make that mistake. It's not a database. It's much more than that. And it's also a platform. Okay. Howard, sorry, I haven't left much time for this part, but why don't you talk us through this part as well?
Okay, so this is, in a way, we discussed it yesterday, but it's also just trying to highlight some of the challenges that you'll face when you set up a master data system once you've understood the domains that you're going to bring in. And this was a really nice talk we had yesterday about how master data can help you in your data privacy engagement. And not that I want to talk much about this slide, but just to show you that the master data system in the middle will be fed with information coming from your CRM, coming from your ERP, your human resources, and your third-party data. And what we can see here is that, for example, customer is in 3 different systems, and we will need to understand how we bring in those customers into a single domain and to establish a golden profile. So that's what's core about this element. And you can see vendors are called in CRM, they're called the vendor. In the ERP, they're called the provider. In HR, they're called providers. And then in third party, they could be an account or a contact. So different terminology, different glossary that are synonyms for the actual customer or vendor itself. So there's another challenge that you have to harmonize and almost describe synonyms for that. So the development steps that I want to share with you, and this is to also help to answer the Renault question about how do we bring all our business partners together. And the idea is that we first of all identify the system of record that will be helped to populate the 360-degree view of whichever domain that you're talking about. It could be product, could be business partner, could be customer. And there we get a complete set of attributes. Now, it's very helpful to initially work at a conceptual level and say, okay, for each of these systems of record, what are they all providing? And then once we've got the system of record, we then go and say, for the identity information of the party or the business partner, which system will provide us with identity information? And that's almost the business key that we will use to recognize and handle the matching and merging and aspects like that in the golden profile. And then we would go by column set or groups of columns to say, well, again, which system of record will be the authoritative source. Once we've established that, and that's a lot of the modeling that comes through, we will then go into getting the data into the master data management system, getting the quality right, understanding the matching and the loading, and then focus on maintaining the golden profile. So as we've done that, and then things change in the system of record, and they try to come back in again, we'll pick up collisions. We have to then manage survivorship and what we refer to as data space versioning. Once you've got that, you're now then ready to start publishing to subscribers. And the next step would be almost how do we bring this all together within a BI system or dimensional system. And then moving on, Paul. So, okay, so that's at a high level, and we do have some further slides to answer, give some details with Renault's question, but we will have just tried to get through this before the question section. Okay, so if we go to the master data governance, this was a nice quote in the DMBOK, and you will find if you go through the DMBOK, every single knowledge area then has a subsection on the governance of that section. And this comes from the master data chapter. And what we're basically saying is reference and master data are shared resources. So they definitely require governance and stewardship. And the governance processes will bring compliance and legal stakeholders together to understand the consumers and the risks. So why is it important from a governance point of view? We must be able to review, receive, and consider new requirements and changes to these master data systems because they will help and facilitate the sharing with other applications and the usage of that data. And I've been involved in several 360 master data systems where they bring in all the data, they try to bring in the customer data across all different business units, groups, and stuff like that. Then all of a sudden we start finding that we've got purpose issues, but I didn't share my data with you to be shared with somebody else. And so governance needs to get involved with dealing with stuff like that. And so how will governance do this? There's principles, rules, and guidelines to guide the population of those 360 views and centralized data sets. Okay, Paul? And just to note that there's some really nice processes that can help you with guiding on your master data system. I don't need to go through it all, just wanted to make you aware of that. And the next slide will show us some metrics that we can use to measure the effectiveness of our master data system. And there you can see data quality, change management, integration, ingestion, coverage, and ownership. And then what is our sharing volume and usage that we're getting out of it? So how do we measure the success of our master data platform? If we keep going. And then we get to the community of practice. I really like this slide in terms of, I don't know how many of you guys are involved with massive organizations that have very different business units and departments. And we were talking to a bank this morning where I actually like to say that some of the banks are more like a country than a set of departments. And therefore, all the controls and the regulation, the direction is set at the individual level. And it's not that easy to get centralized control over all these areas. So an alternative to centralized control is to build communities of practice where you have common standards and things like that that will then allow each area to grow the way it needs to grow. And the best informal process that you can do is establishing a community of practice. And then next slide. one of the things that we're finding, of course, with data governance and master data, when there's a lot of socialization that takes place, is yes, you can have a lot of this stuff, but you have to introduce and augment that with community of practice, which enables the sharing of knowledge and conversion of implicit knowledge to tacit knowledge. And then moving on, Paul. This is just a practice definition mind map that we use. It's got all the details. So when you are building policies, procedures, and things like that, it's nice to have a standard definition that you can use almost as a recipe to apply to your other areas. And this is one that we've developed for reference and master data. And you can see all the different areas that you need to deal with. So it's RACEs, it's making sure that you have terms of references defined. Who's going to be responsible for what? What's your ownership? What's your stewardship? Certainly a big element of that is business alignment. Never forget the fact that data management is there to enable your business, and we're not doing master data management just for the fun of master data management. Moving on, Paul, I think we've got to the end. We can now sort of go to the question section. And if you wouldn't mind, guys, let's just, there is one question I'd like to go through with, and that's a question that Rena put together. There is the question over there. And it's really this idea of we've got many different systems of record with different business partner information. How would we bring this together into an a master data system? Rena is working with SAP, and that's called MDG. That's the single point where everything comes together. And then we've got to distribute to and publish to our subscribers. So just remember that model that we presented earlier on of get your systems of record, then your authoritative source, then get your golden profile, then publish and subscribe. Okay, so let's see if we can answer this question. Rena, I hope I do a good job. I know you've waited for a while. Here is just a flow that we talk about. So if I look at this, here we have a really good example of the fact that we've got customers all over the place, we've got suppliers all over the place, and in certain cases, we've got business partners all over the place. So there's the blue area over there where we say, okay, we want to build a business partner master data model. And I can then identify these three source systems or systems of record that could have different party information. And you'll notice, as Rena asked, is some of them may be at a company level, some of them may be at an individual level, some of them may just have passport numbers, some of them may have ID numbers or whatever it is. So the idea is that we would create a master data system with a digital ID that we allocate to the business partner. We would then bring in a series of attributes that reflect the company and how do we identify the company. We would bring in a series of attributes that reflected the individual. Once we've got this golden profile sorted out, we are then able to feed the downstream systems, the SAP HANA, the BI, the target application one. Oh, shucks, I only deal with individuals. I'm not interested in companies. So all you need is then the individual information, and same with target application 2, and then you may have applications that want all the information. So that's how the flow of information will go through. So if we then go to the next slide, this is almost the crux to a party, and I use the term, the party is almost a hanger where I can attach information to it. So I can attach identity information, I can attach electronic communication, I can attach names, all sorts of stuff that can be attached to the party, and then all employees and business partners linked to via the relationship that Paul showed earlier on. And here we can see that in some cases you don't want to have one big record, and that's to an extent why we go away from the golden record and talk about a golden profile, is that you don't want to have a single record and then you have lots of nulls. So in some cases the company would give a VAT number or an LEI number or a registration number. All of those ensure a unique ID And I'm not sure if you guys have just seen BankServe on IT Web saying that they want to be the provider of a digital ID for all companies within South Africa and individuals. So there's things like that already happening. LEI is a similar thing with the World Bank. They've allocated unique IDs for any company that's part of a market, a global market. They would allocate an LEI. And we can also see now with individual identification, so an individual may have 4 records. They may have a passport number, they may have an ID number, a driver's license, or any other accepted number. They may have an account number that we use. So we have different ways of now identifying those individuals that, or those individual identification types, sorry. And that party can be identified by any one of those. So when we're trying to bring in data from these different systems of record, we can then look up to say, oh, you're an individual. Do you have a passport number? Do you have an ID number? Do you have a driver's license or a social security number or none of the accepted? And we can identify you in multiple ways. And if we go one slide down, Paul.
I think this is it.
Okay, sorry to go back there. And then one slide back. Okay, so this is Rena. I hope this answers your question in terms of almost that flow and the process that you need to do to get this to work, where you're saying, okay, which systems contain business party information? We spoke about an approach to identify where the authoritative source data should come from, evaluating those systems and seeing which ones are trustworthy and which ones have the best authority, then choosing that one, building the master data, the consolidated business partner, and then the process of distributing that information to the different applications. So that was a bit of a rush job, and Rena, I hope that answers your question. If not, have I misunderstood something?
No, Howard, I think you explained it perfectly well. And yes, I'll just follow these diagrams, and I think I should get there. But thank you so much for putting this answer together for me. Thank you, guys.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, that's the power of that party model. I must say to you that I've tried these party models a couple of times. Business get very confused very quickly, and that party is very much of a logical reflection. They will get used to it over time, but initially they can back against that thing and say, but where's my customer? Where's my supplier? So abstraction in data modeling, and then certainly at a conceptual level, can be dangerous and doesn't always reflect the terminology that's used. So be careful of that. It's a very powerful technique to provide you with flexibility within your system, but can be very confusing at the same time. Paul, I don't know if you want to talk about that reference model.
Yes, I just want to again support Howard's comment there. Before we go there, the party model is really great to conceptually think about, but there's actually different levels of abstraction that comes into play when you implement that thing. So it's possible to still be concrete in your implementation. In other words, have a customer table, if we just talk plainly, and an employee table, for example. In a pure party model, you'll have them together, and you'll differentiate them by types and so on. But it's still valid to have, for example, a physical implementation of those two things separately, but they still share, they still link back to a party ID or things like that. So I think that's where experience comes in. I often tell the MediClinic story, but what I don't often say is we've learned a lot of hard lessons in that party model because it's a very complex one. It turned out to be. We were very pure in applying it, which means that we have a lot of flexibility in what we can do, but with flexibility comes complexity on the implementation side. And I think it's worth going through a process of just making 100% sure you use the party construct to understand what your typical roles are, what your relationships are between the roles, and so on, and then think very clearly about when you implement it, that you don't overcomplicate it or be too simplistic about it and paint yourself into a corner. That I don't know what the formula. There's probably a formula for that, but I think just experience is very valuable in this regard, just to help with that designs.
And I think certainly what we teach in data modeling with the Steve Hoberman courses, it's great to have that level of abstraction, but please, guys, if you're going to abstract like that, you then have to pay attention and put in the effort to simplify it, and especially the database access, either by means of a view or providing some Excel spreadsheets, whatever it is, so that when business people need to access the data, they then can access it at a very simplified view. So the abstraction gives you flexibility, but it causes lots of pain. And we know that customers are certainly business people are going to want to get to the data and ask questions about the data.
Cool. Are there?
Yes.
Oh, may I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
When you had the different approaches of where to start, is there one that's like a preference over the other one, so giving you faster delivery? Because I just thought of this, if it's a system-based approach, then it to me felt like your benefits only come further down the line as fewer people benefit from the solution. Or is it, have I got it wrong?
So maybe just my experience, Paul, is in one case I was called in where the procurement was dying. So that PTP was an absolute mess because they had multiple vendors, and they had product issues and things like that. So there was such a good business case for that we went after that and we got it right within that system. Now, because we then had to apply the quality and the glossary and all this type of stuff, there was so much learning that we could then use to apply elsewhere and start sharing that same data with other people involved. So it tended to come from a pain that was killing some of the business people, and then you find your way into applying it into other domains. So that's certainly been my experience.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and my comment to that would be, I think what's really important of all these styles is is just to find one that would be accommodating to the culture. I think something in theory or on paper can look really great, but then the culture doesn't accommodate that. In my experience, this is almost as much art as it is science. You have to feel your way through it. And make sure that when you implement something that you'll find buy-in and support from the user community and the execs. So it's almost more about culture in a way than about technical approach, I would say.
So Paul, we have two outstanding comments. The one, and I'd like to just agree with Chris O'Connell, data virtualization definitely helps simplify the party model and present it in a way that's useful. So it's a great use case. The other one is I don't think we completely answered the industry reference model. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yes, we did jump out very quickly. Just to say that I have, like I mentioned, I have been using, for example, IAA personally, and it was actually really great to help us figure out not only what the data structures need to be, but also what the processes, what to call the processes. This was for a claims process. We redid the claims process for insurer, and it really helped us to kind of get a standardized flow of what are all the role players in that process, how are they typically named internationally, and so on. However, what we did not do in that project is we took the whole thing. We took the party model as it is with all its, I don't know, 180 fields or whatever it was, and we implemented it just like that. And we said we'll implement the whole thing, but use the fields and so on that we need. we implemented that party model in the integration layer as well as in the MDM application layer. The problem with that was then it became so clumsy to work with it that it was very unproductive in the end. And we learned there that even though these models come at you and you pay a lot for those models. For a set of HTML files, you pay in the millions. Not to say that it's obviously valuable content and IP. However, if you don't go through the process of pruning that, which I know one of our other customers have done, they took the model and they reduced it to, I think the architect said it was something like, if it's 20%, it's around there. The rest of the stuff they pruned, and this is a big insurance company that I'm talking about. They pruned the rest of that model because it was not quite applicable, or the business were just working in a bit of a different way, and they came up with something that was lean and that could accommodate the actual requirements better. So my take on that is reference models are really good to understand what the subject area is. I wouldn't have known anything about, for example, medical insurance if it wasn't for some of these things that I've worked on. However, you still need to. You can't replace your thinking altogether. It's a help you think tool. It's not a replace your thinking tool. That's my take on it.
Paul, I think there's also when we teach on data modeling, we talk about a data modeling scorecard, and on the data modeling scorecard, it talks about enterprise alignment. Now, the reason I bring this up, this is the type of thing you'd put into a practice definition. We would also develop a scorecard for master data, and we would then, as an organization, decide how important it is for your data model to be aligned with the enterprise model. Some of them, I know, some of the big financial services and the telcos, they demand almost absolute adherence. And they almost generate a lot of the databases from these models. So it's all about how your organization has decided to make use of those industry models. And you would then lift up that scoring mechanism to, you score out of 100. And if you have a scorecard for enterprise alignment and you want to have complete addiction to it, then you would lift that up from 5 out of 100 to 20 out of 100, or 50 out of 100, to make sure that guys don't think about this. You take what the enterprise model has defined.
Thank you.
Yeah, but they're great. They're great to help you.
Yeah,
it's better.
I've certainly found very helpful to resolve conflicts around your terminology. So if you're getting people disagreeing, you say, okay, well, what does the industry talk about? How would they classify that? And Len Silverstone has almost taken that industry model of his and built ontologies and business glossaries from those data models to help you with that type of scenario. So that's also another great use of an industry model. So we've got somebody's hand up there. Let me just check. It's Rion. Rion, questions from your side?
Yeah, Howard and Paul, thanks so much. I started typing and I thought it might be just easier to just quickly chat it through. So I found that, in a very large organization, when and the question really relates to the different approaches that you've shown here and the one that you got up here, system-based, is that the risk that you run when allowing, maybe these other approaches, especially the last three, which are very focused on process or specific lines of business, that you run the risk of siloed data management, where these guys run off and they make decisions, around specific masters for their specific use cases. And, in our environment, I found that you actually need very strong governance, and it goes beyond just principles and policy settings to almost govern the overall, let's say, the overall program around your MDM efforts. Because otherwise these guys just run off and they do their own things and they don't make decisions, from an enterprise perspective and more local based, and and that impacts other areas along the line when it comes along. And you can't get rid of it, because I mean it would be driven by business priorities, and different areas have different maturities and all of that. So maybe you just want to know if it makes sense what I'm trying to convey across. Some of the lessons learned or insights that you can share to maybe better govern or drive some of the overall roadmap. So these guys at least stay in a way aligned or communicated that they know about. Because we, for example, had a case where we were going to implement a sort of a product master of reference, sort of a consolidation style. But then, in the meantime, we find out that there's other guys driving an operational master for operational use cases, and and there will be clashes along the line. I don't know if that came across all right.
Yeah, it did.
Sorry.
It did, and that's certainly that's why you have lots of failures, Rian, in this area of master data management. I think there's some guidelines that I like to use. One is the business case, and how prevalent and how applicable is that business case to all of the people that are going to be forced to use that. And so you may, for example, have certain within a group that's you can get that consistency and control, and then and depending on the business case, you would then get very regimental about it, and start to enforce the use of that data. And certainly any data that's then shared, you can then say, well, where did you get your party information or whatever it is, or your product ID? Where did you get it from? And if you haven't got it from that master data system, well, you just discount the data. That data cannot be shared. So it does depend on your strategy and your business case as to how you came about to build this and justify this system. And it's almost like if you're going to go to war, just make sure you select the right battles, and that you can win, and that you've got the right support in your organization. Paul, PG, what's your comment?
No, I don't actually want to add much to that. I think that's spot on. There's a lot of, again, the whole art versus science thing is, I think, what comes into play here as well. It's it helps a lot if you've done a few of these things, but the context is so important, and what works for one customer often doesn't work for the other one.
Rian, I'm not sure, did it answer your question?
Yeah, happy for now. Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Rian, you are right. You got to find, why are you burning? Is there a burning platform? The burning platform dictates your approach to this thing, and depends on how much the burn is how regimental you can get. If the burn is not high, people can ignore it and build their own in Excel and stuff like that. But if there's recognition on that, and it may not be a burning platform, it may just be good stakeholder review. That's the way that you bring about the consistency across your organization and the sharing.
Yeah, you see, the challenge comes in really in. I think it's very easy to almost drive a business case that are almost system or process or specific business area focused.
Yes.
And when there's actually a broader enterprise need, to actually manage that, it becomes a lot more difficult to actually get ownership and drive that, at that level. And that's why I think governance is so critical, to actually get that together.
Correct. And it's architectural. So, it's not just your governance, but it's your architects that are your solution architects, that they go into the business unit has a problem, they need to get it solved. And then your solution architects say, oh, but I've got a good solution for you. It's sitting over there, and that's what we need to use. And so that whole team works together to ensure that people are going to the right source.
The thing is, people find a way, and like we had an actual conversation with a customer this week, or was it last week, where they have a very real and annoying MDM problem on one of their systems, but sort of people find a way around it, and there's just not, although it annoys everybody, it makes a lot of things very difficult. To get that problem fixed will actually be quite expensive, and so the business case is not quite there, or not quite there yet, and you know, and you find a way, if you have good people working in your organization, they kind of find a way and make it work. But yeah, some of these styles are definitely orientated more towards bringing people together, bridging the silos, and you could argue that especially on the system space, it is very singularly focused. However, depending on the system, that also, one system can cover a lot of domains as well. It's just, again, I come back to the thing of culture. Sometimes people can't think of their business processes or their domains without thinking of the system first.
Yeah.
I often use this example where I used to work at an insurer, and the business people, they speak in code, in system codes. It's part of their normal business language. They don't use English words, they use the mainframe code. So anyway, it's a little about the culture.
Sorry, Paul, I've got a meeting at past. I'd love to chat more. I don't know if there are any more questions. Paul, the last one that you may be able to handle is someone was asking the question between reference data and master data. That was the last question that I understand we need to answer. I don't know if the person is still on, but could you give us a quick differentiation there?
Yes.
I think one slide was really good in terms of what is master data, things, people, and that, and then I think there was a reference data element on that. But
yeah, I think we actually dealt with reference data in last week's session in a bit more detail. I think it was Abdul that asked the question.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I need to leave. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
It's fine, Al. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Paul.
Is Abdul still on the call? Maybe just, if he is, just you raise your hand. I can see if you're there. But anyway, so master data, to give a simplistic answer, has a lot to do with what you sell and who you sell it to, customers and products, and who in your company is helping you to do the work, employees. And where do you get your raw material or services from, suppliers? And master data is really about that. It's about, in a typical sentence, if you describe a transaction of what your business does, for example, my company Data Gambit sells, let's say, coffee, right? So Data Gambit is a party, coffee is a product. It sells it to a consumer, that would be customers, and the fact that I sell it is describing the service or the action that that I'm involved in. If we talk about reference data, it is the things around how I would classify the coffee that I maybe sell. So the way in which I describe the products, that could be internal reference data. So I've got a DG cappuccino and a PG espresso or whatever. So those things would be it would be related to product, but it would be reference data related to the product. The fact that I sell coffee in South Africa means that I use South African rand as a currency. I might want to export later and so forth. The reference data about currencies, the currencies are also reference data. So ZAR, USD, Great Britain pounds and so forth, they're all reference data. And you can see already we've got different levels of reference data here. Some are internal to my product, some are somewhere else. I can pull it from an internet list. It's sort of standard. reference data around countries, for example, the standard list of countries or the standard country codes, the ISO codes. Those are all reference data that I can pull from somewhere else. And it's kind of a simplistic answer, but I hope I get the message across. Maybe I'll just say, lastly, say this, that sometimes your master data and your reference data are almost the same. It can be confusing of which one it is. I'm thinking of an insurance company at the moment that we recently did work for. The way that they think about their products, in one way, could easily fit into the description or definition for reference data, and looking at it from another angle, it could be product. So sometimes it's a little bit blurry, but generally speaking, reference data is a list, any kind of lookup list that you can just go and find, either outside of your organization, like a standard set of country codes, or inside of your organization, like a standard list of product categories or whatnot. I'm hoping that helps a little bit. Don't know if Abdul, if you're still on. Are there any other questions we need to take on? Riza, yes.
Yeah, just a quick question. You've mentioned the TIPCO a few times. I'm just wondering, when you work for a client, perhaps a big bank, and I mean they don't have TIPCO or Informatica, is that something you would try to persuade them to use, or is it too difficult to implement something like TIPCO in a big company?
Oh no, TIPCO. Look, if you look at again, I'm not a reseller of any technology, but Informatica and TIPCO, if you look at the MDM Gartner quadrant, for example, they are the two top right-hand corner ones, and they are made, you know, they were created for big sort of implementations. Informatica in South Africa is used in Sasol, I think Sasol. It's used in MultiChoice. It's used in Sanlam. You know, there's a lot of places where that's deployed, and TIPCO is deployed in Sanlam as well. Most of the examples that I've used, Mediclinic, MedScheme, some retailers that we've done work for, Anglo, they're all TIPCO customers. So, I mean, we're talking about big companies here. And when we have a, I wonder if it's here nearby. We have a 7-step process, or building blocks, we call it. It's actually based on a Gartner model that speaks to all the things you need to talk about and consider when you design an MDM solution, or any data management solution, really. And tools and technology is one aspect thereof, but there's 7 building blocks, and we always keep it at number 6, because we want to talk about all the other things, actual requirements, the vision alignment with the business to support their requirements and be cognizant of the constraints and so on. The data governance style, this sort of thing here, like you see on the screen, the roles and responsibilities, the whole information architecture landscape, what data is there, what systems is in your landscape, what technologies have been bought before, should we leverage those relationships, should we buy their add-ons, or should we, you know, consider new ones? That's a whole process. So tools and technology is an aspect, it's really important, but what you shouldn't do is buy a tool just because it looks good or it's in the Gartner quadrant and then try to solve a problem. You need to do it from the other way around. Make sure you know what you want to do and then pick the right technology, because they are quite different. I'm hoping that makes sense, Riza.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks.
Can you share who you work for or who you're thinking of, or?
Well, I work for Telia company. That's a well, I'm in Norway, but that's a Swedish telco.
Okay.
And I'm not familiar with like MDM systems and such, and I haven't heard of TIPCO, but I did check them out, and I saw that they were working for big companies. But I was just wondering how important is that tool? But you're saying it's there is a lot more to it, obviously. But
Sure.
I would just imagine that introducing a tool like that would be a big job. But
yeah. I mean, it's probably worth a separate discussion. Happy to chat, but it's really important because it has a lot of a good MDM system has a lot of features that will fast track you. Having said that, you should never be led by the technology, and you should rather figure out what you want to do and then pick one. I mean, all the big players have good products in this space. Again, TIPCO and Informatica, I'm familiar with them, but they also happen to be the top two in the Gartner quadrant. But it means IBM has MDM software. Microsoft, I would not go with them for large deployments, but I mean they've got multi-data services. Talend is another one that some of it is open source or open core. I mean, so there's lots of them, but you have to pick the right one for what you want to do. And these two that I keep on mentioning, one works really well for 360, and the other one works really well for organic MDM, and we sort of I know them. That's just why I mentioned them, but it's not the only two out there, obviously.
Paul, thank you so much. It's been fantastic, and I can see for all the comments in the chat, everybody really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for your effort and the contribution. Thanks to everybody as well that asked the questions and contributed. It's been fantastic, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Good evening. Ciao, bye.
Thanks, guys. Go well.
Bye. Stay safe.